Okie dokie, and we are recording. And this is the very first session in what I'm going to start coining catch up over coffee, where I'm going to be inviting guests along, and particularly people who've got absolute expertise in the field of sales. And we're just going to kind of talk sales philosophy, right? And so my very, very first guest joining me today, and Caleb, are you actually joining me from Bali?
No.
Ah.
I wish. We came back in March because of the whole COVID thing, but
right. Okay.
We have a home waiting for us to come back.
Right. Okay. Bummer. Where are you in the world today?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Wow. Okay. Well, that's kind of exotic too, in its own special way. So
Yeah.
I'm joined by Caleb Lesa, who I will confess to anybody who's watching this. We've actually only just literally met this morning. I mean, we've corresponded a little bit via Facebook, and there was a post that Caleb put up just the other day that kind of grabbed my attention. And you might remember that's the "I want to think about it" post. We may or may not go down that road. But yeah, as I saw what you'd posted, what became really interesting to me was your story. Before we get into that though, are you a beverage drinker?
I am.
Are you a tea or a coffee guy?
Coffee guy for sure.
Coffee guy for sure. All right.
I've got my old plunger coffee.
Plunger. All right. Well, I'm on an espresso. So cheers to you. We'll catch up over coffee. Caleb, before we kind of get into some of the sales philosophy, tell us your story.
So I first fell in love with sales when I was actually at a place called the New Zealand Broadcasting School.
Mm-hmm.
So I originally studied to become a radio DJ. That was what I envisioned for myself.
Right.
And because I got told like I had the voice for radio and apparently the face for radio as well. I was at this broadcasting school, and they brought in a guy who was like the most charismatic man that I'd ever met. And he was kind of like the human personification of how to meet friends and influence people.
Right. Okay.
So he was very like remembering people's names, shaking hands, very present. And I hadn't met anyone like that before. And so I pinned him down for a coffee, funny enough, catch up over coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of my first experience of mentorship where he's like, so what do you want from the next 5 years? And I was like, I want to do it by the book, right? I want the house, the car, the girlfriend, and create all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, cool, what's your vehicle to get there? Like, what are you choosing? It's like, I want to be a radio DJ. And he goes, I hate to break it to you, son, but radio DJs make $35,000 a year. There's no way you're going to be able to pay a mortgage with that. And I was like, oh, just my old dreams are just crushed in a second. And he goes, can I tell you about something that will change the way you think? And I was like, yeah, of course. He goes, why did you love becoming a DJ? I was like, because I wanted to talk for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, great. And he ended up introducing me to sales.
Right.
And that was probably when I was like 17. And that's when it all, kind of kicked off, where I shadowed him on all of these meetings, and he'd sort of take me back to the car, and he'd be like, what did you see? What did you notice? What did you hear? Why did I say this? And so for a good 6 months, he took me under his wing.
Wow.
And I don't know why, but he just took an interest in me. And that was just the whole curiosity of like, no appointment is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And no person was the same, because he wasn't into pitching. Right. It was really strange. Like he had a slide deck and a bunch of stuff that he could share when asked the question, but he was really into people, like really into people. And everyone that met him loved him. Like they were just so positive when Jack showed up. His name was Jack. Mm-hmm. And that just fascinated me, that he was extremely successful as a salesperson, and he was just into people.
Right.
And that started the curiosity. That was when I was, it's 10 years ago. 10 years ago now. And so then obviously I got my first sales job, and then I saw the opposite. So I saw the traditional sales tactics. It was phone sales day. I got handed a stack of phone numbers. It was like 200-300 pages, like 100 numbers on each one. And it was called the cull list. So this was all contracts that had ended, clients that didn't like us. It was like the worst of the worst. And my boss said, smile and dial. And I was like, oh, and that was my introduction to sales on phone sales day. And for every sale that you made, you got $100, right? So I was like, okay, I see what goes on here. And I shot a look across the room, and there was this lady who was the epitome of all bad sales. And I remember she smelled like coffee and cigarettes. I'm not even kidding. You could smell her across the room. Wow. And she talked in this Brooklyn accent, which was like, hey, love, how are ya? Like just, it was hilarious. She's a walking meme. And she was just abusing this guy on the phone, just yelling at him, saying, you know, you're a pussy. I'm going to come down there and tell your wife that you can't run your business because you suck. I'm going to tell your business partner that you know, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, I'm going to keep calling you until you say yes today. I'm going to call you every single hour. And I was looking across going, wow, I'm going to be successful. And I'm never, ever, ever going to be like that. And 6 months passed, and I became the top performing sales rep for new business in the country. Mm-hmm. Just based on everything this Jack guy had taught me.
Right.
Which was just put people at the center of the sale and you'll be taken care of. And it just sounded so simple.
Right.
But it was just amazing at how many salespeople just didn't understand that one core premise that sales is about relationships. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's kind of it. I spent a couple of years in a sales role. And then in 2016, I became a coach when I moved over to Melbourne. Mm-hmm. And I just naturally went where my expertise was. And I've just been telling people ever since that it's not about the pitch. It's nothing to do with the pitch. It's about knowing the person in front of you well enough to solve their problem. It just blows my mind how backwards everyone that I've talked about sales, it's like pitch, 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 pitch. If you just stopped and listened, right, they're going to tell you what they want, and you're not going to have to sell.
Right.
And the one thing led to another, and then I got trained up in extended disc behavior profiling. Mm-hmm. So I took an accreditation, and then I was sitting at a cafe with a friend of mine, and it was one of those moments where we had a napkin, and I was like, surely there's an easy way for people to be able to profile people without needing to do this. Like, it's reasonably simple, isn't it? You only need to know these 3 things. Mm-hmm. And I wrote them down, and she looked at me and she's like, that's genius. And I looked at this napkin, and I was like, wow, it's true. You only need to know those 3 things. And then you can understand exactly how your buyer wants to buy. Mm-hmm. Like, are they time-based? Are they action-based? Do they need time? What their primary hot buttons are? Like, what their buying strategy is? What's important to them when it comes to the purchase? And if you knew that, then your entire sales process could just adapt to what they needed. And and then sort of one thing led to another, and that's just what I've been doing for the last 4 years. It's just been, you know, working with coaches or mm-hmm. sales professionals, or I've worked in real estate, IT. It doesn't really matter what industry, because the consultative sale is always the same. Yeah. So that's the story.
Very good. Okay. And I'm going to come to the ethical sales movement in a moment. But before I do, I'm going to go back just a little bit. So it's interesting. My son, who's now, he'll turn 21 in January. So probably 4 or 5 years ago now, he and I were sitting dining al fresco one late evening, and a Lamborghini Aventador drove by, and his jaw dropped off. And, you know, Josh, my son, is a supercar nutcase, right? And I mean, to the point that he will hear a vehicle a kilometer away, and he will tell you not only what brand it is, but what model it is and what variant it is. And 9 times out of 10, even gets the color right. There's something freaky about the boy. But as this Aventador drove by, he turned to me and he said, Dad, what kind of job do I need to get to be able to drive one of those? And I thought about that for a moment. And, you know, clearly he's got my genes in him, so he's not going to be a rocket scientist. And so I said to him, well, mate, you've got kind of two key choices here. You either need to go and build your own business and have it be very, very successful such that you can afford it. Or alternatively, you move into sales and again, get to a point where you can afford it, right? To which he posed this question, do salespeople make a lot of money? To which I replied, thoughtfully, good salespeople make a lot of money. Not every salesperson does, right? So yeah, it was interesting that whole kind of, the fascination with how what's the vehicle, right? So that was the thing that it triggered for me. So Jack posed that question to you: what was the vehicle? Are you still in love with selling? Do you love selling? Because you're coaching people to sell, and obviously you've got to sell to them to get them to come on board. But do you still love selling?
The passion has shifted to seeing people get it. Right. Like when their eyes light up for the first time, that they understand that there's a code behind a sale, where they realize they're like, so if I do this and this and this, it triggers a buying response. And I go, yes. And then they do it, and then they get it. And they come back and they're like, what just happened? It's like, that's selling. Like, they're like, but I didn't really do a lot. I was like, exactly. Like, you don't need to do a lot. And then, yeah, and that kind of shifted. Like, it's one of those things where I can listen to somebody's phone call and I know why the sale didn't go through.
Right.
Like, it's gotten to that point where you don't have to think about it. It's just, okay, cool. So 5 minutes in, ABC, this is, and you already know the direction it's going. Like, based on the person that they're talking to and the style of pitching, you can be like, cool, this won't close. Like, how do you know? Because there's some core principles here that you've missed. They're like, wow, I didn't even know. It's like, yeah, because nobody's talking about it. Like, that all of the information that I studied when I was doing my training and listening to books is, if you go online right now, it's Jordan Belfort, it's Grant Cardone. There's another guy, Ryan Stewman, who's an American guy who's probably better than the other two. And outside of Jordan Belfort's tonal sort of persuasion stuff, which is frankly genius, it's actually incredible. It's still very pitchy. The consultative style of selling is not really taught. And what I've noticed is our tolerance for bullshit has gone down quite drastically. Even more so post-COVID. Like, I did another post a while ago, I was like, selling will never be the same post-COVID. Like, there might have been a 20% tolerance in people prior to COVID where, they'd let you get away with your sleazy shit.
Yeah.
Now, I just don't think it goes far at all. And I saw this play out. It's crazy. It was a well-known coach, multiple millions of dollars. I referred a friend of mine in, and they were giving him shit for thinking about it, and it's a $10,000 investment. And he just wanted to come talk to me because we've got great mates and we bounce each other's ideas. And the guy was like, there's talkers and there's doers. I was like, and my friend got so pissed off. Like, this is the guy that has spent 70 grand this year on like a done for you book, some marketing, like all this stuff. He's a massive spender, very successful. And this person's like, these talkers and there's doers. Like, and you nearly lost it. I had to talk my friend out of not doing it because I knew the coach was really good at what he did, like exceptionally good. And he's like, I don't want to work with him. I hate that stuff, man. I don't want to work with him. And I was like, just breathe. Like, it's just a bad sales tactic. It doesn't mean his work is bad. But it just blew my mind that if he knew anything about my friend, that would be the number one thing that would torpedo the deal faster than anything else. So you could say the passion's still there.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that you said when you kind of began the story as to why you got into sales, because he posed that question, why did you want to get into sales? Because I enjoy talking, right? And so there's this caricature of the classic salesperson who can talk underwater with a mouth full of marbles, right? We've all heard that phrase, that hackneyed phrase. Talk us through the 2020 version of that.
It was a very shallow look at what I thought sales was when I first said that, and it's evolved massively. And what I think is important for people to imagine is like some of my best clients that perform the best are actually introverts. Like it seems contrary, but they actually talk less and they listen more. Because depending on sort of where you sit within a behavior profile. Some people process information through talking. So a salesperson might be thinking out loud by talking, but then you might be dealing with a prospect that needs to process information through talking.
Yeah.
So if you do all the talking, they do no processing and no selling is happening.
Yeah.
So the 2020 version of it now is why I sort of love the sales element is because it's so predictable. Like once you get an eye behind what's going on behind the scenes, you get to this point in a sales conversation where you know the pathway that needs to be followed for the sale to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where the passion has shifted to, is like, how can I identify that quickly? And then, seeing if I can close the sale in as least amount of talking as possible. So I think my record is about 9 sort of sentences. I wouldn't say like 9 questions, but probably about 9 sentences where there's been a question that was the right question to direct them to exactly where you need them to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a statement that helps promote the extension of that answer, and then transitions, and then not including any kind of like logistics and pitching at the end.
Yep.
But to the point where they went, so how do we do this? 9 sentences. And I think that's just such a strange concept for people to understand, is like, if you are talking, you actually create distance between you and the prospect. If they start talking, it's like them moving towards you to the point that you stand side by side.
Yeah.
And then once you're standing side by side, you just go, so how can I help?
Right.
And then they're like, oh, well, I need ABC. And you go, well, I've got ABC. Should we do this? And they're like, yes. And I think that's the metaphor that sort of helps people understand, is like, the more you talk, the more you create distance. And, it's just, sales is just not about you anymore.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I'm a big fan of Ray Kroc, the guy that founded McDonald's. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, because there's a saying that he has, and in my very first career, I was in the military. And so, this will make a little bit more sense. A phrase that he uses, and that is, you've got a problem, make it a procedure, and it won't be a problem anymore. Right. Mm-hmm. And if you think about, any McDonald's store and any interaction you've ever experienced at a McDonald's, it's absolutely and utterly procedurized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this thing called selling, making a sale, certainly when I started, which was last century, which is how old I am, right, in the 1900s, we were taught this pattern, we were taught this methodology, we were taught this script to use. What's the balance, do you reckon, these days between free-flowing conversation, the asking of questions to which you don't really know what the answer is going to be, so it could go absolutely anywhere, versus having things that you fall back on?
Yeah, so I like scripts to get you started, because you need to educate yourself on what kind of questions to ask. Mm-hmm. Because the first thing that will increase somebody's results is powerful questions. The problem I have with scripts is, what if I ask you something that's off script? Right. So you need to learn the principles behind the script, or the framework. And what we've kind of recognized is that there's only really 5 sort of points in a sales conversation that need to be crossed. And, if it's valuable, should I talk about the 5?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So the first one is, cool. So the first one's setting an agenda. And some people love agendas, some people don't. It sounds more formal than it is, but it's really just an introduction to what you're doing today, which is like, hey, we're just going to have a quick conversation about, what's going on in your business right now, and where you want to go, and what some of your challenges are. And then by the end of the conversation, we're going to have a chat about whether or not I can actually help. Is that cool? And so what an agenda does is it future paces the entire conversation.
Yeah.
If you're on a time limit, you can put a time limit in there. So you can say, we only have 20 minutes today. And what that does is I can't remember the actual law, but it's like the law that something will take as long as the time that you give it. Mm-hmm. So if people have a problem with sales conversations taking 2 hours, which they don't friggin' need to, mm-hmm. then it's a lack of agenda setting at the start of the call.
Right.
And, it's because one of the questions I get all the time is how do I talk to qualified prospects? I was like, it's not the way to think about it. Talk to everybody, but shorten your sales conversation. Like if you don't have the luxury of abundance of leads, then talk to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But just get that conversation down to 15 minutes in and out instead of 1 hour.
Yeah.
Then the second thing that we need to do is it can go either one or two ways. So we can talk about the mansion or the symptoms. And so the reason why I call it the mansion is because there's like, in somebody's mind, there is the perfect scenario that they're thinking about, or what life looks like after the problem that they come to you is solved looks like,
mm-hmm.
which we call the mansion. On the other side is what we have, the symptoms. So it's like you're this doctor listening to the symptoms of what actually is going on right now. So by the end of the call, you can prescribe the medicine for the symptoms.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is if a doctor doesn't listen to the symptoms, like keyword being listen,
mm-hmm.
and they prescribe the wrong medicine, they would get sued for malpractice.
Right.
Yet in sales, we're just handing out prescriptions like they're freaking candy, just going, here you go, here you go, here you go. You haven't even listened to the symptoms. So these two steps are kind of interchangeable because it depends on who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where scripts fall over, because the script would say, go to the future first, or go to the mansion first. But you might be dealing with someone who wants to talk about problems first. And so one of the fastest ways to build rapport with somebody is to get them talking in the language that is easiest to them.
Mm-hmm.
So some people find it really easy to talk about what's going on right now in terms of their problems and the symptoms of that. Other people find it really difficult.
Yeah.
So if you're in that first 15 minutes of the sales call, 5 minutes for an introduction, 10 minutes for the next phase, you're not sort of deep enough in rapport to get them to start thinking harder about something that is foreign. And this is where scripts kind of create friction.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you recognize that this person, the transition step is, so what's going on right now? They say, look, I've got this problem, but I want A, B, C, E, F, G. I want this mansion. You go, cool. So then we look at defining what the mansion is for them. And then the next step, quite obviously, is looking at the symptoms of what's going on, of why they don't have the mansion.
Right.
What are the consequences of not having the mansion right now?
So
and
to
this
what
works
degree is that, sorry, if I can interject for a moment, to what degree then is that predicated by whether they're what's often described as either a move towards or a move away kind of person? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, that's what, without getting too jargony,
yeah.
But if we were to use the technical terms, it's a moving away and a moving towards strategy.
Yeah, okay.
So if you have clients that move towards, they're going to find it easier to talk about the mansion if they move away. So a lot of the concepts that I'm sharing are based in human behavior.
Yeah.
And so, what sits underneath this is this mansion versus symptoms. It creates what we call cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So cognitive dissonance is, for the listeners that don't know, is the gap between where somebody is now and where they expected that they would be by now. And that friction between the two places is what triggers a buying response in the prospect's brain. Like smiling because you're one who knows, right?
Well, I actually put a post up yesterday with a big image which has the word cognitive dissonance in it. But anyway, so yeah.
And the thing is, it's not a new idea. Like I've looked around at a lot of the sales processes, and people are doing it, but they're doing it by force rather than by consult.
Right.
And if someone can just get their head around, your role as a salesperson is to consult about the prospect's cognitive dissonance, then half the sales conversation is done. It can really be that simple. The hardest thing is just stopping yourself from over talking in the consult. Because I've seen this all the time where they ask a question and then the person says something and then, the coach or the salesperson solves the problem by offering an insight, which comes to this other idea that a sales conversation is not a coaching conversation. A sales conversation is deliberately creating open loops or asking about the symptoms and the mentions to leave that open without putting any how in the middle. You put the how in the middle, you take out all of the friction for that person to buy.
Right.
And so this is kind of the meat and veg of the sales conversation. And as long as these two stages are hit, doesn't matter what order you do it in. Then the third thing that we look at is something called the invitation. And so the invitation is really where the script kind of flips and we get the prospects to sell themselves to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds more complicated than it is, but this is where we start removing objections before objections become objections.
Right.
And it works on a principle from Cialdini called the law of consistency and commitment. And what we do at this stage is we say, so knowing where you are now, and obviously where you want to go, how can we help? And, one of the first things people say is, well, isn't that what you're meant to do? And you go, yeah. And that's okay, because it doesn't really matter what they say, as long as they start telling you what it is that they want to solve their problem. So you don't have to guess. This is the crazy thing. All you got to do is just listen. And they say, look, I want help with this. I want help with this. I want some support. I want this. And you just think in your head, yeah, I got that. I got that. I got that. Yeah, we got all that. Is there anything else? And they go, no, that's it. Cool. Well, we can do all of that. They're like, oh, great. So it's this weird dynamic where if that cognitive dissonance is large enough and you ask the question, they're going to tell you how they want their problem solved.
Yeah.
It's just very because they already know what they need. And this whole problem with pitching versus listening is they know what they need to solve their problem. You just got to ask after you've built the gap. And then we get into reverse qualification, which is a part of the invitation, which is getting rid of the time and competition objections by getting them to tell you why it's not a problem, which looks like, so why now? So, this conversation could have happened 3 months ago, could happen 3 months into the future. So I'm curious, why now? And they will then tell you why now is the right time to do it, which again, when it comes to the close, they can't then tell you why they can't do it now, because they've created their own cognitive dissonance in their mind where they would have to go back against what they said. And it causes too much friction in the brain. So what happens is you actually start getting the real concerns, if there are any, at the end. And then we move into the other one, which is, there's tons of different coaches out there at the moment. You could choose from hundreds of them. So I'm curious, why me? And so then they start telling why you're the coach for them. So by the end of the call, they've already decided that now is the right time. And, you are the coach that helps them. And then the last step is just to prescribe. So here's what we did. And this is what I suggest. We catch up for this month, blah, 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 blah. And then after that's prescribed, the other part that we teach is respecting people's buying strategies. And this is where we sort of engaged, was where I said, it's okay to let people think about it. It's fine. As long as you maintain control of the frame, which means as long as you book another meeting and you get commitment and you check in, is there any reason why you wouldn't show up to this meeting? It's fine. It will increase your chances of closing someone. There's no point trying to handle the whole, I need to talk to my partner. If anyone said to me, I'm going to buy this thing. They're like, I need to talk to I'm just going to run it past my partner. They'll be like, oh, do you really need to? I'd be like, yeah. And I'm not fucking buying. I talk to my partner because we have an equal relationship.
Yeah.
And if they knew me, they knew my archetype, they would know that if they gave me any shit about talking to my partner, it'll torpedo the deal, right? Faster than anything. I'm out, I'm done. It's actually not worth it. And so people have these little triggers, which is really the other thing that we layer under this is the human behavior part. But, in answer to that question, how are scripts? I like them to a point, but then you need to understand the thinking behind the script. And then that script can support that so that you actually have the ability to freestyle.
Yeah, cool. Great stuff. You've kind of triggered a whole bunch of different memories for me. So once upon a time, I co-owned a sales training business. And, one of the things that we would routinely be teaching our students was prescription without diagnosis is malpractice, right? So
Yes.
there's that phrase that we used to teach way back in the 1980s. I think we were ahead of our time, right? And then, yeah, I guess, you know, with some of the stuff that you've said there, and I think for, you know, for those people who are watching amongst my client base, most of whom will be business owners, and many of whom have this reluctance to be a salesperson. There's a chance that some of the stuff that you've just said now is pinging them a little bit around, is that manipulation, right? You know, you're using their psychology, you're using their behavioral archetype to kind of twist things around. And let's maybe even use this in our last few minutes to talk about the ethical sales movement as well, right? Because I know that you're not about manipulating people. That's not your bag. What are your thoughts on that? Where's the difference between truly understanding how somebody's hardwired and prefers to behave and therefore is best sold to, as opposed to manipulating them?
Yeah, it's a really valid concern, because like whenever I talk to the greatest fears of the market that I'm working with, the greatest fear is, oh, I don't want to sound salesy, and I don't want to manipulate people.
Yeah,
which is fair. Like, that's really fair.
Yeah.
And no one wants to do that. So the way that I encourage them to think about it is, what are your rules around what you sell? And so I like, because the key thing is, this cognitive dissonance that they have exists before you discover it.
Yeah.
So it's already there. And so if it's with you, great. But if you don't find it, someone else will.
Yeah.
So that's step number one. Number one is to realize that you didn't install anything; it was already there. If they've contacted you and you're there for the consult, it already exists. And so the other thing to think about is, if they don't work with you, what's the alternative? Can you be sure that the next person, if you don't close them, is going to serve them as well as you do? And this is something that I sort of think about all the time when it comes to sales training. It's like, I don't want you to learn sales from anyone else but me. You know, in this moment, like if you've talked to me, I have a bias against my own stuff, because I have to love it. And I don't want you to learn what my friend learned in terms of sales about. So you kind of have to believe that you have the best solution for them. And at the same time, respecting that, and kind of like trusting that the right people are going to dig you and going to want to work with you. So you don't need to worry about convincing people, and sort of thinking about it as like, if they did solve this problem and all these wonderful things happened, that your role is kind of like an invitation, where you have a golden bridge for them to cross, where you are simply putting an invitation out in the way that they can understand in the best possible way. Because the problem is, if we don't, and you know, business owners will experience this all the time, right? Where you've said something one way and the person has completely not heard it, or you've explained it in one and they've done something completely different. Because the way that you've communicated and the way that they receive information is completely different. And we see this all the time between like accounts and admin and salespeople. There's always this conflict, because salespeople are typically sort of future-based thinkers and non-detail orientated, and accounts-based and admin people are obviously highly detailed. So part of what you're doing is you're actually catering to people's preferred linguistic style of how they want to hear information, and you're also catering to how they want to buy. And so you want to look at the contrast to that, which is, who does that? Nobody does that. And one of my mentors early on said the best sales conversation ends on a thank you, where the person is thanking you for closing them. Right. That's the benchmark.
Yeah.
And so I think that helps with any kind of like, you know, am I manipulating someone? You'll know based on the feeling that you have at the end of the call, where they're like, I can think about it. You're like, yeah, sure. Let's just book another meeting a couple of days from now. Dot your I's, cross your T's, and we can catch up about it. Are you sure? yeah, I'm sure. You don't have to make a decision today. It's fine. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. And for the people that love to buy now, it's like, so what, what's holding you back from making a decision today? And you'll feel a little bit of resistance, and then they make a decision, and they're like, "Oh God, I'm so glad that you made me, that you asked me to make a decision."
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
yeah, so that's kind of what we're based on. Is we have a manifesto which is along the lines of who you be as a salesperson directly influences how you sell. So one of the things is if I'm in a contract with a coach, I won't break my contract, right? I hold myself to a standard of would I be okay if my client did that with me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I operate from a place of cause and effect, right? So if I'm out and I'm late on my bills and I'm not paying, or I don't invest in myself, then I have no right expecting clients to do that with me.
Right.
And so the ethical sales movement is based on number one, it's kind of people. So it's a people-centric approach to selling. Is know the people in front of you, not for purposes of manipulating, but to be able to build rapport quickly and to be able to speak in their preferred communication style. Because remember, at the end of the conversation, it's not a close, it's an invitation.
Yeah.
And you have a wicked party, right, that solves their problem that you invite people to. And whether or not they take the invitation is completely up to them.
Love it.
And so, yeah, so the ethical sales movement is based on like who are we when we sell, and are we integral in our own life before we begin selling? Like if I ghost a salesperson, I feel terrible. So every time someone like I get on a call and like I forget to get back to them, I'll be like, oh my God, I'll write this email, but I'm so sorry, I didn't mean not to get back to you. Here's what went on. I'm sorry, because I don't want that to happen to me.
Right.
Because I believe in this idea of cause and effect, of how I am with my integrity and my way I sell is how my customers will be. So yeah, so that plus people is what the ethical sales movement is based on. And it's kind of like a call to action to learn a newer way and to put transformation and invitation at the center and the heart of selling, rather than convincing and tactics. And it's not really, anything new. It's just highlighting what people already want.
Yeah.
Because the tactics are working less and less and less and less as we get more and more and more sick of what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of what we're about.
I love it. That's great, man. I love it. And again, what it reminds me of, so I've had several businesses over the last 20 years. And whenever I've had salespeople in my team that I employ, one of the very clear guidelines that I give them is just look for the ones who are looking. Right? You don't need to convert everybody to our faith. Like not everybody's going to want what we're selling. And some may never want it and some may just not want it now. It really doesn't matter. Right? Just look for the ones who are looking. And if that's not who you're talking to today, acknowledge that, and say goodbye to them gracefully and professionally, wish them well, go look for the next one. It's fine, right? You don't have to be twisting people's arms and doing trial closes and then, the million variations of closing that existed back in the day. So I love it. That's really, really good. Mate, thanks very much for spending some time with us today. I really, really appreciate it. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. It's flown by.
I can't believe how fast. It's just, completely gone. So thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Let's do it again sometime soon, and we'll kind of come in on a number of different angles, perhaps.
Sounds good.
Yeah?
It's really good.
Cool. So, folks, I hope you've really enjoyed this session. Obviously, chances are you may be seeing a snippet of it somewhere on one of the socials, and then the big kahuna will be up on YouTube before you know it. If somebody wants to get in contact with you and learn more about what you do, Caleb, what's the best way for them to do that?
So they can find me caleblesa.com.au, or one of the best ways to actually interact with me is on my social profile. So if you just add me as a friend on Facebook, I think we've got a few room left for friends. And I run a group called the Ethical Sales Movement. It's awesome. Like there's so many resources there that are there for free, because it's
brilliant.
I just believe in building those relationships first.
Yeah, great.
So if you want immediate help with that kind of stuff, you can just jump in that group.
Fantastic. Right, mate. Thank you. That's been great. And